there wasn't much to be seen. I walked deeper into the cave, but there were no signs of anything that would excite anyone other than a geologist. I noticed what looked like a turn further back but decided against going too far since I wasn't experienced in spelunking. That's when something hit me, a primal fear that everyone has experienced at some point. It's a deep feeling of dread, as if you're being watched or stalked by something horrific. Chills crawl up your body, and you sense that something just isn't right. I felt this fear and immediately froze, rifle in hand, pointing it down into the cave. I couldn't hear anything, nor could I see anything unusual. However, I quickly realized what was wrong: the smell. It was the same pungent smell that the coyote carcass had been emitting. It seemed too rotten, too pungent, and too strong for just a coyote carcass, even in the sun. This set off every alarm in my mind, and every ounce of fear told me to get the hell out of there. I slowly backed out while shouldering my rifle, pointing it towards the back of the cave. Every rock under my boot sounded 100 times louder, and every breath I took felt like it echoed through the entire cave. As I reached the entrance, I turned and bolted for my bike. I started it up and rode back as quickly as possible, taking no chances. Dusk was setting in as I was riding back, and I was contemplating either moving to a new campsite or calling off the trip altogether. 2 days in, I still wasn't sure if any of this meant anything or if I had just been overreacting. However, I knew that some odd things had been happening. As I rode closer to my campsite, I noticed that everything seemed off, as if nothing was how I had left it. I was feeling really uneasy now but wasn't about to leave my expensive equipment behind. As I got closer, I realized why everything seemed off: my campsite had been raided. My tent was torn, my mess kit was strewn about, the fire pit had been scattered, and my pack had been dumped out. I assessed the damage and realized something strange: nothing was missing, just vandalized. Even my radio, solar charger, and extra ammo remained, things I was sure would be gone. My decision was made: I was calling it quits. I started packing up my bag and salvaging whatever I could that hadn't been ripped up. This was about the time I noticed something else: there were no sounds at all. No cicadas, no crickets, no birds, just complete and deafening silence. As I was packing, I quickly drained my flask to calm my nerves. Nothing at this point could have changed my mind about leaving. It was quickly becoming dark, and even with night vision and a rifle, whatever was out there was obviously screwing with me. Now, it was obvious this territory belonged to someone or something else, and my hunting trip had turned the tables on me. As it got darker, I decided to scan the area first to make sure my surroundings were clear. I looked around, but I couldn't see much other than the familiar desert landscape. As I began to scan the area near the peak of the mountain, I saw something move. It was just visible behind a rocky area. I tried to make out the shape, but it was distorted and hidden by some larger rocks. I stared in that direction for what seemed like hours, and then it stood up. To this day, I will not forget the sheer terror and fear I felt while looking at this thing. It was as though death and evil itself were staring right at me. Every part of my mind screamed, this cannot be real. This bipedal creature stood as though it were human, but its eyes were massive, just massive blank dark spots. In my night vision, there was no reflection or gleam coming from them. I couldn't distinguish any real features other than what seemed like a scaly texture. It just stood there and looked in my direction, as though it knew I was watching it. Then it did something that nearly made me lose control of myself. It smiled, but it was not a normal smile. It was a terrible, jagged-toothed, Joker grin smile. My heart raced as I took the safety off my rifle and shined the IR laser at it. After a brief pause, I delivered a fatal 8mm round to its head, or so I thought. The shriek that followed was deafening, blood-curdling, and absolutely terrible to hear. It was a scream that went straight into your soul and shattered it to bits. The dying screams of someone getting their head sawed off with a rusty Taliban blade would have been comforting at this point. I watched this thing shake and shudder for a moment and quickly delivered another round in its direction. I think I hit center mass, but I couldn't be sure. It ran at a pace I'm not even sure my bike could keep up with, down the ridge. It wasn't coming straight at me, but it was too close for comfort. I bolted down into the wash and kept my gun trained in its direction as best I could while running.